Everybody, this is Leslie over at VCGI, and I'm going to get things started in just a second. I just want to let everyone who is currently on here as an audience member know that you are all muted right now. Obviously, this is more of a meeting than a webinar, even though it's the GoToWebinar thing. And I can go ahead and unmute all of you if you'd like, but I will say that one other time I tried to do that, there was a lot of I don't know if it was background noise or feedback, and I ended up muting everyone again. So I will try unmuting you. If it doesn't work out, I'll just mute everybody again. And in case you haven't used GoToWebinar or GoToMeeting before, you can always type in questions and comments in the panel that says questions, and that'll come right to me, and I can either respond to or bring up the question. So I'm just sort of giving all possibilities at the beginning. But I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody. So that means if you do... Oh. Yeah, okay, sorry. Started right away. So I am going to keep everyone muted. But feel free to send me a question or a note if you have a suggestion for how I should do this. I'm also noticing that it looks like everybody is coming up as having signed in twice. No, not everybody. David and Kate. All right, sorry, I'm mumbling to myself. So this is Leslie. We are going to have our presentation by Chris and Michelle about SPAN and NEMRC and the Grand List in Vermont. And like I said, everybody who's on this webinar can go ahead and type in any questions or comments, and those will come to me. You don't have to worry about those interrupting anybody. And I will speak up if it looks like a question that needs to be answered right away, and if it's something that can wait till the end, I might wait till the end. It looks like most of the people who are going to be here are here, so I think we'll probably go ahead and get started. Chris Mealy from NEMRC and Michelle Wilson from the Tax Department are on the webinar, and I'm going to be handing control over to Chris in just a moment so that we'll see his screen. So if anybody has any questions, I would say go, actually maybe I'll make sure everyone can hear me by saying that if you can hear me, click on the little button that looks like an orange hand with an arrow on it. And if you click on that button, then I will see on my screen that you can hear me. Okay, good, great, thank you. I see you all. Okay, so Chris, I am going to do a couple of clicks here, and I should be able to hand it over to you. And you'll get a pop-up box that just says, do you want to take control?
That's correct. Yep.
Great. And it probably just take a second to switch over. Okay, and it looks like we're seeing your GoToWebinar screen there. There we go.
Okay, that should be my desktop that everybody sees. Let me just change my screen a little bit. I should be able to see audience view here.
And I'll add one more thing because I forgot to say this. I am recording this so that anybody who wasn't able to participate today will be able to watch it, but you'll all be able to watch it too, and I'll just send out an email with the link to that.
Okay, it's been a little bit since I've done a webinar. Like Leslie said, if somebody has a question, just put your hand up and we will stop and unmute you probably and let you ask your question, or you can type it up down at the bottom. Typically I have a way to show audience view, but I do not see that on my screen, so if I'm talking about something that doesn't look like the screen that's up on the window, just let me know and I'll slow down here. So I was approached by Leslie and Michelle Wilson from the Tax Department to talk about SPAN numbers and how they interact with the Grand List. I am currently the Vice President of New England Municipal Resource Center, and when I was first hired, my focus was the Grand List program and Act 60 and how everything all ties together and how we get tax bills out and work with education funding. So as we started through on this endeavor, we had pretty much started having every town in the state use our Grand List software. And I double-clicked on the Grand List icon. Every town in the state does use this software now to produce their Grand List and to produce their tax bills. And that being said, what we did is every town had their own unique parcel ID structure. Some use tax maps, some use 911 numbers, some use just random numbers, 1 through 100 or whatever. And we needed the ability to download files from the state when people file their homestead declarations once a year. And also we needed a way to apply their state payments to their individual tax bills or parcels. So what we came up with the assistance of the tax department, we all got in a room and sat down and said, why don't we can't ask the listers to renumber their parcel IDs. It wouldn't be practical and you would get a lot of pushback from that. So what we came up with is a SPAN number, which stands for School Property Account Number. And when I go into the Grand List, you'll see I have a few separate Grand Lists. I've got 3 or 4 of them here. And each year a town creates a new Grand List. And that's where their tax bills are printed from. Okay, but every town has a working Grand List, and then they'll have a number of these as-built Grand List. Their working Grand List is their current, that's their product that they're working on. This time of year, they're getting it ready for their 2015 year. So I'm going to go into this working Grand List. And when we set up the SPAN number, we decided that the SPAN number has to be unique. And the way we made it unique is it's comprised of 3 components. The 3-digit town code, followed by a 3-digit school code, followed by a number that starts at 10,000, a 5-digit number. Starts at 10,000 and increments 1 for every single parcel. So I'm going to go into some of my test data here. I'm going to click on parcel maintenance. And you'll notice one of the fields that listers can do searches by is SPAN number. And you can see the test data I have here. I have town code 396, school code 123. I don't know off the top of my head who that is. And then blank. The next 5 digits are empty. This is the way 90% of the towns are set up. They can just, if they know that parcel 10,050 is John Smith's parcel, they can just simply type in 10,050, and that parcel will immediately appear on the screen. Okay? So I'm going to hit cancel here and click the find button. This shows you the SPAN number sorted by increment. So this parcel, the day we assigned SPAN numbers, this was the first parcel in the database. And then you can see it simply increments 1 for every single parcel throughout. Now as you add new parcels, we'll go all the way to the bottom here. The next parcel that I add will probably start with SPAN number 14,902. Okay, is everybody pretty comfortable with this part of the explanation of what the SPAN number is and how it got assigned? Now, Leslie, I can't see if anyone's putting any hands up.
Yeah.
I don't know if you still can.
Yeah, I will let you know. I think I don't see any questions so far, and it looks like everybody's good. So that
Okay.
And that was very clear. So yeah.
Okay, good. So there's a couple of caveats that happen with the SPAN number. Do they ever change? No. Can they ever change? Yes. Let me get rid of that call. There we go. Now, when can a SPAN number change? Well, there's some conditions. Unlanded mobile homes is a great example. Unlanded mobile homes unlanded mobile homes are assigned a span number. Okay, so this is a mobile home that's on somebody else's property. So let's say I own 5 acres of land and Michelle Wilson comes to me and says, I would like to rent your property and put an unlanded mobile home on it. And they say, okay, I'm still going to be the owner of the land, and the land is going to have their own span number. And then when Michelle Wilson goes to the mobile home dealer and buys a mobile home, moves it into my town, when my listers, let's add one, when my listers add my mobile home, I'm going to create a new parcel. Category type is going to be unlanded mobile home. Owner code, whatever applies. Okay? No acres, and I'm going to save this record. And it asks me, is this a new mobile home to this town? Yes, it is. Okay? Now when I bring that parcel back up, you can see it assigned span number 14902 to Michelle's mobile home. If Michelle lives in that mobile home for 5 years and decides, you know what, I want to upgrade my mobile home, she'll click Replace Existing Mobile Home. Now this may or may not really apply when you're dealing with, I know your main focus is how this would apply to tax maps. An unlanded mobile home probably wouldn't apply to a tax map unless you started to get into some real minutia of what's actually on or an inventory of what's in the town. But when you replace Michelle's original mobile home with a newer one, then you click on Replace Existing Mobile Home and it will assign a new span number to her new mobile home. Okay? The span number stays with its original mobile home. So if Michelle sells her mobile home to somebody else in town and they take it and move to a different town, then that mobile home will get a whole brand new span number within the other town's borders. Other than that, span numbers stay the same. Now, that's one example of how span numbers get assigned and one caveat. Let's look at another caveat. And we'll just use these last two parcels, 16 and 17. Let me just jot down those numbers here. So 244017 and 018. Okay. So we're going to pretend that this guy, he owns 1 acre. He ends up, and you can see span number 13,817. And he looks at his neighbor that's got 30 acres over here. And he says, hey, do you want to sell that to me? What typically will happen, in this parcel is span number 11,521. When you combine parcels under the same ownership, the rules to taxation say that you will only tax this person under one large parcel, not under two separate ones. So, what we do here is we will inactivate the parcel that the gentleman is buying. And we'll come down to contiguous parcel and we will say it is contiguous with 244017. I got too many zeros in there. There. We'll say that this parcel has been combined to Stephen's main parcel. Okay? Once I do that, I click on the Save button. I got to go to Stephen's parcel. Okay, he's only got 1 acre of land originally, but he just added 30 point some odd acres. So we have to go to the acreage, and we'll add 30.34 acres, and that totals him up to 31. And this parcel now shows that he is contiguous with, that he purchased parcel number 24418 at some time in the past. So the span number will stay on that inactive parcel, but that inactive parcel will no longer get a tax bill on its own or show up on a grand list on its own. But it's still in the town's grand list database. So if Stephen ever decides to subdivide that parcel back off, that parcel will pick up its same span number.
Can I ask a question about that,
Are there any
Chris?
questions on that?
I have a question.
Yes, you can.
So is there a way for the town, sort of managing their database through this interface and looking at this, to create a listing of properties in town that's slightly different from the grand list in that it breaks out those contiguous parcels as separate entries? Like do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do understand.
Like an inactive list. Yeah.
What happens is there's 2 ways. An inactive parcel can't be included in the state grand list,
right,
because at the tax department they're going to reimburse you $9.50 per parcel for the maintaining of the grand list and setting up for a reappraisal at some time in the future. So they don't want to give you that $9.50 for parcels that have been combined. So there's 2 ways you can do this. You can produce a regular grand list here through reports and produce a grand list, and also produce a list of inactive parcels over here on the right hand side, and or you can use the export field, export data, and with a FoxPro expression say, give me all the parcels, active and inactive, and produce a list, an Excel spreadsheet, a DBase list. That in this routine allows you to select what fields you want to supply with, i.e. the person requesting the data. So Leslie, with your situation, I would include both active and inactive parcels. I would include parcel IDs, span number, whether the parcel is active or inactive, and any other information that you might request beyond that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And that will give you a complete listing. Now, here's the caveat. Some towns do not inactivate parcels. I can only do a best practices, but what a town decides to do in actuality is their right in how they want to operate their grand list. So I do have some towns that physically delete combined parcels. Okay? So they delete the inactive parcel because they don't want to see it in their database at all. And that's their choice. It is not, and I think I can speak for property valuation and review, it is not NEMRC's or property valuation and review's best practice to delete parcels. Our best practices state inactivate a parcel and then make notes of where that parcel got moved to.
So if a town deleted a parcel and then later there was another, there was a subdivision again of those parts. Well, it's not even a subdivision. They're actually legally separate parcels. So if it was sold separately in the future, does that mean they'd have to just get a brand new span assigned to it?
No. If a parcel is deleted, so like the instance where we had Stephen buying that other parcel, and then Stephen decides to sell off that other parcel sometime down the road, if the listers use the same exact parcel ID, the program will remember and bring back up the original span number associated with that parcel ID.
Okay, so numbers are not being recycled yet. And probably won't
No.
ever.
Span numbers will not be recycled.
Okay.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
Okay.
You can't because it will raise havoc with people's
Yeah.
state payments and
Yeah.
homestead declaration downloads.
Yep.
Yeah.
So-
And it breaks the whole system as a unique identifier. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Correct. I have had instances where people have flip-flop parcels and kind of done some squirrely stuff, and we've had to rectify that and change a span number. But if that's really infrequent, and when that happens, property valuation and review or the taxpayer services is involved. But I can't even think of the last time I've had to fix that for anybody.
Okay. I have another question here from Andrew. I think he's asking about, he's continuing with the combined parcels issue, and he says, is this only true for combined parcels which previously were which actually were physically adjacent? In other words, can you combine non-adjacent parcels?
No. Contiguous means that they have to be touching in some form or fashion. So you do not combine parcels where one is at one end of town.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you own a 2-acre parcel on the south end of town, and then 5 miles up the road,
Mm-hmm.
you own another 3-acre parcel. Those two parcels cannot be made contiguous. They have to be touching a common side.
Yep.
Or a common corner. They have to touch somewhere along, even if it's the very corner of the parcels.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the best example of that is like, what are the 4 states out west? Nevada and that all have one common corner. That would be it.
I know what you're talking about.
It's New
Yeah.
Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado.
Very good, Michelle.
Thank you.
Where those had 2 parcels that were diagonal from each other, were in that format, in that cube format, because they touch in that one corner, they would become contiguous. But if there's no common boundary, then they are not. Does that answer his question?
Yes, and then Kate has the next question, which I was going to also ask. I think I know the answer to this, but can parcels split by a road or river be combined?
Natural boundaries, roads, interstate, rivers, railroads, all that does not, that's part of the contiguous definition.
Mm-hmm.
So if I own one parcel on one side of the road and directly across the street is my other parcel, those are to be combined.
Mm-hmm.
Rivers is the same thing. Interstate's the same thing. You are to combine those 2 parcels. And remember, the key here is it's got to be under the same ownership.
Right.
If it's not the same ownership on the deed, then it can remain separated.
Okay. I think that's it on that question.
Okay. So we can provide a listing of every single parcel and their span number at this point. When parcels are combined, though, it's only been the last couple of years that we added this feature where you can see what parcel they've been combined with. In prior years to this technology, listers used to make a note somewhere. I always recommend it in a location field or in the notes database, in the notes field on this screen.
Right.
Because what happens here from year to year, I always have listers before they get ready to print their tax bills. I have them go back out of here to the reports menu and do this comparison report. And one of the features of this comparison report is show me all the new parcels I've added and all the ones I've inactivated or deleted. And if a parcel shows up on this list as inactive, then I want to know, I always look at them and say, okay, what parcel did that get combined with? And if they can't tell me, and they say, well, it should still be an active parcel, this is my safety net to tell them, well, you inactivated it and it's not going to get a tax bill. And that's a good safety check for the listers to go through and make sure that they've added the right amount of parcels and inactivated the correct amount. That's why PBNR and NEMRC do not recommend physically deleting records. Because once they're deleted, that's it. You have no more history about it. They'll still show up on this report, but they'll show up on a report saying this one's gone. Typically, the only time I see parcels being deleted is when it's personal property, inventory, and equipment.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, you can.
The FoxPro filter expression, does that mean that the listers using this need to know syntax for FoxPro?
It depends on the level of lister. Some do know a little bit about it, and some do not. And some will call my office for assistance. The FoxPro expression filter is just a way to pick certain people out of a crowd. So if I want a list of everybody that's on Main Street, I can create a FoxPro expression that lists everybody that's on Main Street. That the mailing address says Main Street. You see some, and once you create them, they stay in the list. Like you have one here where the name is greater than ABB. I don't think that one works. I think somebody just tried to make that on their own, and that isn't going to work. But if I do something like, now let me get to a real report. Let me go to, veterans. No, that one just does veterans. It doesn't give me that option. Let me try a grand list one here. Okay, so if I say, show me where value is larger than 100,000. The field for the value is called P_real. And if I say greater than 100,000, that will produce a grand list report where everybody's real value, assessed value, is greater than 100,000. Okay, so that's not something that listers really do from a day-to-day basis, but they have the option to be able to do that. And some of them will not know how to create that syntax. We have instructions on our website, but most people will just call our support line and ask for some assistance. And then once you've created it, when you look down in your list, it'll always be there. And you can select it and edit it and change it to 500,000 if you want. Okay? Does that answer that question, Leslie?
Yes, thank you.
Good. So I did mention about personal property. Inventory and equipment is probably something you're not really interested in having on a tax map program. However, all the personal property, because we decided to keep this very simplistic and assign any parcel in this database gets a span number, including personal property. So we assign personal property for those towns that have personal property. Those parcels have inventory and equipment as a span number as well. So they can opt to filter out and not send you the personal property because they do have that capability. So they can just send you your real value, your real estate parcels. And if I go to Grand List, you'll see out here one of the options is they can make a file by real estate parcels only or personal property only, or both. You had a question there, Leslie?
Yeah, when we get, if one was to get the full grand list for the whole state from the tax department, does that include the personal property as well? I assume.
I would believe so.
And
Michelle?
I was just going to say, is there an
Yeah.
attribute that would allow one to filter that out?
There should be. We get in the 40 fields, well, it's not quite 40 anymore. It's about 44, Chris. We get a limited amount of the fields. We obviously don't need all of the fields that are created in NEMRC to do the data collection that we're doing, because we're doing it, we do collect at the parcel level, but we're looking for the aggregates of really the values. But the personal usually does come over.
Okay.
And we get those reports.
So I will just throw out now that I think we are very interested in what exactly does get passed over in the grand list to the tax department, since that's kind of that final product is what we're imagining people working with parcel data are going to want to attach to.
Well, now, Chris?
Yes.
In a town, if I were to walk into a town and ask for their grand list information, what would they give me at the town level?
It depends. They may give you a paper copy of the grand list.
Then
They may
requesting electronic form.
Electronic form. They would probably do export data.
So really, Leslie, people wouldn't be dependent on what they send, because what we receive, like I said, is a limited amount of information. What typically do mappers do? Do they request it of the town that they're in?
Well, no. So I should explain this better. Our idea, and this is part of the reason we wanted to have this presentation, is to sort of talk through some of this. Our idea is, I mean, right now our assumption is that what we want to do is we want to create parcel data, or each town creates its parcel data. We want the towns to create good parcel data that has the span in it, and really not that many other attributes, with the assumption that after that parcel data has been created and perhaps made available to us, I now, just some random person getting a copy of that parcel data, can say, well, I know that I can attach the grand list data to that parcel data in order to have more information on my map, things like the owner, the value, whatever else is in the grand list. But part of what's behind that idea is that we know we can get the whole grand list all at once from the state, not have to go town to town to get each town's grand list. That's part of the attractiveness of that scenario.
Well, there is some technology, and we do this with some of our other programs, where a town wants us to send their grand list data, or sometimes their assessment data. They want to send it to their tax mapper every 6 months. So that they sit down with their tax mapper and they decide, hey, we'd like to have parcel ID, owner name, address, and number of acres, and assessed value show up when you click on their polygon on the tax map. And those are the only 5 fields they want, and maybe even the span number. It doesn't really matter. So they'll say, is there a way that you can design it so that we can just click a button and it will create that file for us, and then we can email it to the tax mapper every 6 months? And the answer is absolutely.
Okay.
And we can do other things where, if you want it a little more hands-off, where, okay, you want the data to go to the tax mapper automatically. What we'll do is we'll give the end user, the lister, a program that when they click, they go, we usually set it up under Z, custom reports and routines. We would set them up a custom routine that will extract only those 5 or 6 fields that they designate, and it'll copy that file in, typically it's a comma separated. That's typically what people like to use in the IT world for importing and exporting of data.
Yep.
The data stays nice and small, it's easy to be handled, and easy for extraction. So we send it up to our server, and we store it there, and then their tax map people retrieve it from there, and they download it. So you don't have to get involved with emailing or any other transfers. Sometimes the tax mappers will say, well, we have an FTP site, can you jam it and stuff it in a folder on our FTP site? And we can do that. We'd prefer not to, because typically you end up with restrictions when you do that. Typically you end up with the tax map company sets up some restrictions to their FTP site or their internet site, and then it blocks the file from being sent. So we like to control that front end part. That makes it easier for both parties, because if something does get blocked, we have the IT staff to say, oh yeah, yep, let us open that up and get that going again. That happens very infrequently. We do that with the tax department and some of our other clients from the western side of the country. We also do it with Vermont Print and Mail. They're a company that will mass produce a town's tax bill and mail it into a mass mailing of it, so the town doesn't actually get involved with the folding and stuffing of envelopes. So we put a file up on our server, and then they go and grab it, download it, and they produce all the tax bills on tax bill paper and mail it out. So I would think that would be probably a good alternative to think about. That way you can just, and it can be set up as an automatic routine that I would have listers sign up for. Because the thing that you don't want to get into is to make people feel like you're getting their data without them knowing. Nobody wants that to happen. And you don't want them to feel that they have to give you, even though it's public record, you don't want to put someone in a position of feeling like, geez, you know, we're doing all this work and you're getting all the data and you're doing whatever you want. This is a symbiotic relationship where you're trying to make a tax map and add some added value information to it. But you also want to be sensitive towards someone that says, you know, my townspeople don't really feel comfortable having their names and addresses on the web linked to their parcel. And you want to take that into consideration. And one misconception that outside entities think is that NEMRC has all of the data. We do not. And we don't give it to anybody else that requests it. If some company, I just had a guy call me and ask me for somebody's grand list data. I don't know how he got my number or my name, but I said, you will have to take that up with each individual town that you want the data from. And he's like, well, I thought you had it all. It's like, even if I did, I wouldn't give it out. I work for the towns, period. So if the towns call me up and say, you know, Chris, could you help me out and get this data, then I would do that. But you never want to put it out there where data is being transferred to somebody automatically and a town doesn't realize that that's going on. That's why we do the custom routines where you click on it, or we have had people sign up where they sign an agreement saying, we're aware and we would like our grand list data to be transferred twice a year to XYZ company. And we can set it up that way. But we make sure that they understand that they're signing up for that and that we have that documentation in-house as well.
Okay.
So those options are there, Leslie. Those are pieces as you go further down this that we can streamline so it doesn't have to go through the tax. You can most certainly get the data through the tax department or through property valuation and review, but we can certainly streamline it on a town-by-town basis.
Yeah, because we don't really have the capabilities here to create a document that you might be interested in, we're going to give you all the information that we have and in the format that we have it. I just sent you a copy of the two record layouts of what we do have. And you can see the 40 fields that we collect out of the, 140 CRIFs that are actually in the grand list. So,
yeah, plus or minus. In
yeah.
some of those aren't even going to be fields that you're interested in on a tax map level.
Yeah, no. But it's the idea that, you know, there is different information available that might be more conducive to what you're using, but it exists, or at least it might exist, where we're very limited. But and we also have the sensitivity issues. When we looked at posting the grand list online, just as a statewide compilation of grand lists, the towns were very sensitive to and very opinionated as to what they did and didn't want to happen. So that's why we've chose not to do it and to stick with the CD. Still available publicly, it's just not posted.
Okay, that's good to know that that happened, that you guys were considering it and that you got feedback about it.
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
So is there anything else about the span number that I can address for anyone? I think it's pretty straightforward how it gets assigned and how it stays on parcels.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the only other thing I would add is that if a parcel is a vacant piece of land,
mm-hmm.
and then somebody builds a house on it, the span number does not change.
Right.
It stays as the whatever span number the vacant piece of land has, that's what the house will end up having.
Mm-hmm.
So those don't change in that format. The only time a span number really is created is when there's a new subdivision or a new unlanded mobile home being introduced to that town.
So I noticed that you have non-tax parcels and state land parcels as separate reports, I guess.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
And I know that I think Michelle had told us a little bit about the fact that non-taxed parcels, the state has fairly recently started, I think the word is requiring the towns to include those in the grand list where maybe they hadn't always in the past. Is that right?
No.
No.
They've always been part of the grand list.
Okay.
And it's always been, I've been doing this for 16 years,
mm-hmm.
and it's always been property valuations and reviews recommendation that if you have a non-tax parcel, enter it in your grand list program, because that is that parcel gets included in your $9.50 for maintenance of your grand list. Now, most towns have non-taxable parcels in their database and state land in their database. Some towns don't have all of them. But this year, the legislators passed a law where they want to see not only the non-tax and state-owned land parcels, but they want to see what values are associated on those parcels. So they made it mandatory, I think, coming up in 2015, that you have some sort of value associated with those parcels and a statute that shows you what statute, what is it, 320 something?
3802.
3802.
It shows the exemption of why there's no value being collected.
Right.
You know.
Why this parcel should be non-taxable.
Right.
Yeah. So those have been there, but predominantly non-tax and state-owned land parcels have been included in the grand list program since I started.
Okay.
It just depends on the individual town.
A lot of the towns over the last couple of years have been adding them back to their list, and so I'd say the trend has definitely been to make the list more whole.
Mm-hmm.
Where before it was viewed as not worth their time, they're seeing that it is,
mm-hmm.
and they're getting back to listing them.
Correct.
I have another question for you, Michelle. And I can't remember if I actually asked this of you in the past, but I know it sort of came up. The idea of basically just a report, I guess, of how many contiguous parcels there are. Like, basically what I want to be able to figure out is how many more parcels would the tax department have to pay that $9.50 for, if the contiguous parcel rule didn't exist? I know it's a loaded question, but I'm just...
It is.
I'm
It
really
absolutely
curious.
is. And there's
Yeah.
no way of telling.
Well, but
no
I mean,
way to know.
there is in the sense that
No.
this database identifies all of the inactive parcels.
Mm-mm.
It only identifies those parcels that have been combined since really the lot or parcel was created. So
It doesn't go back to the beginning. You're thinking that
Oh, no,
this database is going to go back,
No,
and it
let
doesn't.
me
Things
clarify.
that have been combined, I would say that things that have been combined, and it really depends on how listers handled it in the past. Well, I'll go back 16 years because that's my age group here that I've been dealing with this, and I've seen everything that runs the gamut. When Act 60 passed in 1996, when I started out doing this, the rule was if parcels are owned in contiguous under the same ownership, you are to combine them and tax them under one parcel. Some towns have done that, and some towns did not. Now, some towns were good about documenting when parcels were combined. Others did not. They just made a note in their card system. So there's nothing in this database that's going to tell you that parcel number 10 became contiguous or absorbed parcel number 11, and now you don't even see a parcel number 11 in the database at all.
Okay, because what you showed us, you actually did mention this. That's a new function in here. So even
Yes.
the thing that does really pull them out separately, so that you can do a report specifically about inactive parcels. That's really only in the last year. Did you say it's this version of it that has that?
A couple of years.
A couple of years. Okay.
And prior to that, we
It would be in the
recommended
notes, right?
Yes. And even there, you would find it sporadic. And
Right.
sometimes listers keep it in their appraisal software and don't note it in the grand list software. I try to train people that they should do it in the grand list software. If they want to do it in the appraisal, they absolutely need to, because you need that information there. But your grand list software is where everybody else in town is going to look for information. So
really
even if
the official record, yeah.
Right, even if it's just a town clerk that says, geez, I was looking through the tax book today, and I noticed that in 2014, parcel number 2440018 is no longer in here. I noticed that parcel's in 2013. Where did it go in 2014? And then you can either go into the grand list software and see that I've combined it, the listers combined it to 217, or if they physically deleted it, then they have to go somewhere else to find out. And this is a problem that zoning administrators, town managers, other listers, future listers have when parcels aren't documented in the software. So there really isn't a good place to look where parcels have been combined. You know, that's going to give you an accurate representation that John Smith's current 100-acre parcel is made up of 10 10-acre parcels from the 1970s.
Right.
That's
And
all
even
going to be paper document.
And right, so even the towns themselves, it's going to vary a lot from town to town whether they would be able to quickly figure that out.
Absolutely.
Some,
Still
And
might
you've got to
provide
remember,
requirements.
you're dealing with changing of the guards,
yeah.
lister turnover. So, you know, how far back do you want to know? And that was my experience in my early days, is that I went to a town that had 4,000 parcels on their grand list. Really, 4,000? Well, the only reason they had 4,000 is because when things were bought up and combined, they never combined them. They always kept them as separate lots. So they had a larger representation of their town than really what they had for parcels, you know, as far as a definition of a parcel. So that
Well,
one, yeah, go ahead.
No, finish your sentence. I'm sorry.
So that's why figuring out what's been combined and what has remained separated is a monumental task, just because it runs the gamut, and no matter what you do, you're going to have to go through the individual records. And as we move forward and everybody does it the same way through the software, you'll get better and better data. But, you know, if you came to my town, the town of Ludlow, and went in the lister's office and said, you know, I want to see everything that's been combined contiguous from 1990 up, you're going to have to do some paper documentations and along with the software, because they do use the inactive parcel feature of, and they don't delete records, but you're still going to have to go back through some of that ditch digging work.
Yeah, just can't solve all the problems. But one thing I did want to note is, because we've had this happen, kind of the fallacy of all this, and listers, clerks, we've had a lot of people, not a lot, but there have been those that have gotten confused. When we're combining a parcel, it's for tax purposes. The deeds all stay and remain in place. You know, so parcels can be individually, or lots and parcels can be individually deeded, but a tax parcel is combined according to ownership, and that ownership does have to be the same, word for word. You know, if it's, you know, Richard and Michelle Wilson on parcel on this side of the road and Richard Wilson on the other side of the road, they're two separate parcels. But if they're both deeded, even individually as Richard and Michelle Wilson, then they'll be combined into one taxable parcel. So it doesn't negate that division, that legal division of a lot or a subdivision. It doesn't, if you already have a subdivision permit, it doesn't dissolve that by combining. By purchasing additional property, it still remains a standalone lot. It can be sold off without additional permitting if the permitting is correct and in place. So it really is that combining for taxation.
So David asks a question, which is the basic one that I think came up when I first found out that this is how it was done too. And I think, unfortunately, even I can answer his question, which is, why is this done? And I think you alluded to it earlier, which is that the combining of parcels is done essentially to, this may be simplifying it too much, but it is to save money. It's because, for instance, in the example that Chris gave a second ago, where in a particular town, maybe they subdivided into 1 million smaller lots, but then those never got sold separately. They're still all essentially managed as one property. The town would be receiving $9.50 for every single one of those individual lots if this wasn't the policy. If it's all still a contiguous property, same owner, they can either pay $9.50 for all of that contiguous land, or they can pay $9.50 times however many lots there are for that land. And that's the payment that the tax department makes to the town.
Well, that is a good part of it. It also, that seriously reduces the outgo on that expenditure that we have every year. And we do, there are 3 different per parcel payments, so it's not just one. There's $9.50, there's 2 others that also get dispersed. And so that amount of money can seriously increase, and you know, that lends then to how much tax dollars we need to raise to pay these towns back. But also in managing the data. When you have a single owner and you can send them a single bill, you can itemize that on the bill, it's much more efficient for tax billing and for those who have to pay the tax bill to be able to keep track of what is under a single ownership versus having to have, you know, 4 different tax bills for contiguous property that I just have a house on one and I just have 3 other lots that I've purchased. So it's not just the outgo to the state, but it's also in managing the data within the office.
Well, I'll I'll just say as a data person that I would argue that it's not that difficult to have the data be organized per parcel rather than per owner and still have the tax bills be organized per owner. But that's getting into details that don't matter.
Yeah, but remember, we're not dealing with serious data managers.
No. I'm saying things like, just like the NEMRC database here is very complicated, and obviously when you're not expecting the towns to be able to create something like what NEMRC is providing, it's that can sort of deal with that data level of stuff. And then Andrew just asks, does the landowner benefit in any way from combining? And again, I think maybe you just answered that, Michelle, in the sense that certainly the landowner would prefer to get one bill than a bill for every single separate property that's contiguous that they own in that town. Do you think there are any other benefits to the landowner?
Well, the landowner, when they get their assessed value, the more acreage you have, the cheaper that acreage is going to be taxed at.
Per acre.
Because, your first acre of land is going to be worth $100,000, but your residual 5 acres of land, the more acres you have, it's going to be valued cheaper.
Right.
You follow? It's just
like a sliding scale. Yeah,
it's like a kid in school. You have a kid that has one M&M, and every kid wants it. That one M&M becomes very valuable. But if he's got 50 M&Ms, well, then he's got enough for everybody else. The values of those other 49 M&Ms are kind of less, so he doesn't mind giving those up.
We call it the contributory value. So it kind of reaches an exponential point where the balance of the acreage just isn't worth as much as those initial acreage that would most likely have a house site and the house improvements. That's the most valuable.
Although I will say I've had conversations with people both in and outside the tax department about that issue, and that might be a little bit, there might be some who would argue that is essentially, that is a benefit to the landowner, but it's sort of a detriment to the town, I guess, because if someone has subdivided into essentially building lots, if each of those lots was sold separately, their value is going to be different from if you're valuing it all as part of one big larger property. Do you know what I mean? Like the fact that they have been subdivided, it does seem like that the value should reflect the fact that they can now be sold separately.
The value, yeah, they would value that differently. If you were talking about subdivision where they had intended to sell off parcels, so they've done all the subdivision work, they've received the permits, it's all in place, and they are going to market it as subdivided property. Then the lister would look at the highest and best use of the property, and they would increase the value of those independent parcels.
So would you say that the permits...
You cannot say it as a straight across the board because it depends on the intent and the highest and best use of the property. Right. So for some people, having it combined and receiving a lower per acre value is a great benefit. Farmers who collect parcels to have more land to pasture or to forest or whatever it is they're doing certainly benefit from the greater amount of acreage being at a lower value. But if you have someone who's subdividing, who's going out to develop, a developer, they're going to calculate into their cost basis of the holding of that land, and the value that is going to be placed on that land is going to be greater than at bulk rate because it has a site on it. It's been sited. And so, yeah, so you have different instances. There are different treatments for different instances. So it's not a straight across the board answer.
Yep.
Right. You're getting down into the assessment in how things are to be assessed and whatnot. Yeah. Yeah.
There was a question from David just asking why stop at contiguous, or why define it as contiguous properties? Why wouldn't you say that just all properties with one owner should be one tax bill, one
because they
parcel, I guess.
The legislation said they must be touching. I mean, what the thought of the legislation, I don't know if Michelle knows any more
I
detail.
can tell you for the assessment purposes, because again, we go back to highest and best use and treatment of the property. And to combine just everything under one ownership that might be here, there, and everywhere around the town, I'm going to be assessing all those things at different levels. And so the tax bills are driven according to the span number. Everything under that span is being addressed on the tax bill. The other issue is when I do the assessment, I have to file an abstract. And in my abstract, I have to list everything that changed, and I have to notice all the property owners that have changed, as well as the fact that anybody with an unchanged value has the right to grieve. But I need an organized way to also be able to address the filing of all those values and to put them all under one file and keep straight which property you're grieving and what part you're reducing or increasing or leaving the same. Or, you know, I know just myself, because I do have 2 parcels. One is across the street. We own a house on one side of the road and own a house on the other side of the road. I'm the operations chief for property valuation. I had a hard time with my listers in defining, you know, what I was grieving, and that I was only grieving part of my value. And that was all within a contiguous parcel. I think it'd be very difficult to manage that system if I'd included everything I owned across the town. It may be able to be organized in a data system, but when you're managing it on a level of inputting and exporting that data, mostly the inputting, keeping the files straight and making sure you've addressed everything within a file every year, you're going to review those files. It's just, it would lend to confusion. It really would.
So David's going to continue that question of the contiguous, not continuous. So he says, then why wouldn't that same argument apply to contiguous land? Since, as you just pointed out, it, you know, even in your own case, it did lead to a little bit of confusion for the listers. The argument about it being difficult to manage, you know, separate lots that are being called one parcel for tax purposes.
Because I'm still talking about one geographical area. I'm still talking about my homestead included everything, and that's the other benefit I wasn't thinking about. The homestead is all of your land total. The house site is the first 2 acres and your dwelling, and the buildings that attribute to your dwelling. So in the tax calculations and all that, where we use the homestead values, being able to combine my lands to show everything I owned within a single ownership also lends to intent and purpose and the fact that it's all right there. I just, you know, I can't probably intelligently argue this, and I'll tell you the truth, it's not going to change. So. No,
I actually do think it's helpful for you to explain it, because I understand it better now. But that last thing that you said, I'm just curious because it hadn't occurred to me. So using yours just as an example, where you own 2 properties that are contiguous, but they both have houses on them. Obviously, the house you live in is your house site. Does the other house serve as any kind of a house site, or is it just part of the remaining, you know, the value of the remaining land that goes along with your property?
Yeah, it's not in the house site, but the land up to 2 acres is in the house site.
Right.
So we can use part of that land as our house site.
But the rest of it just becomes the rest of your property.
Yeah, if I have 1 acre here and 2 acres on the other side of the road, the first 2 acres of land I own are the house site. The balance is the homestead. Where I get the benefit is when they do the calculations for the income sensitivity, and I can greatly benefit by having a full 2 acres versus if I only have my 1 acre and my 2 acres across the street. even though they're separate parcels.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a road going through them. We don't look at that. They look at
Right.
total acreage.
Right.
And then the second house is non-residential.
Mm-hmm.
And anything over 2 acres is taxed as non-residential.
Mm-hmm.
But as part of my homestead, I have, for my tax rate I'm being charged, all of the land is considered homestead, which means I get the homestead rate. Last year my town had a higher homestead rate, so it wasn't my benefit. But this year we're lower, so that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the dwelling itself, the second dwelling, and any buildings that would benefit that home
Mm-hmm.
would always be listed as non-residential.
Mm-hmm.
So on my tax bill, I'm actually getting 2 different tax rates. I'm getting a tax rate for my house and the first 2 acres total,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm getting a non-residential tax rate for the second dwelling, and
Mm-hmm.
we don't have any extra buildings, but if
Mm-hmm.
I did.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a cost benefit to the property owner.
Mm-hmm. I have to throw in a few more comments. So I'll just let you know, Susan and David are the source of a number of those questions and a couple more comments. And they both, they're the owner and I'm not sure if David's an owner as well, but employee at CTI, one of the mapping contractors. And so Susan just wanted to make the point that the reason that they're grilling you, and she put that in quotations to let you know they're not trying to grill you, is that they do deal with problems that that are mostly, I think, the result of confusion of dealing with this, and that she feels that in some towns the properties are kind of getting lost in the shuffle because of trying to keep track of this aspect of things.
Well, there's a lot to it, that's for sure. In even I've seen property owners go the other way, and that's why some towns don't want tax maps, is because the adjustments of boundary lines and some of the fuzzy logic that goes into it gets a little scary to taxpayers. And I can completely understand that side of it too. I've seen people where they thought their building was on their land and tax mappers come through and draw a line somewhere else and they don't fully understand it, and there's not enough clarification in the deeds to really be able to make out what exists today and what existed 100 years ago. But they can call us at any time. I have no problem with them calling me if they have further questions. I do have another meeting I have to head out for, so
yes, we can definitely wrap up.
I hope I've answered. Are there any other span type questions?
So for those of you out there, this is your chance.
And absolutely do not hesitate to call me or email me, and I'll most certainly address.
And I'm the same. I have no problem helping somebody through a situation that they need, some definition for. This is kind of where our professions are different, and why we do things may seem illogical, I think, to anybody else's profession. The flip side always seems illogical when you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. So I'm happy to try to help.
And remember, this is why we're doing this right now, is because we're questioning the whole assumption that the span is the number and that the grand list is the data that we need to be connecting the parcel data to. Because, I mean, it has always seemed like the most logical thing, but I think as we talked more about the span and the grand list, we realized, well, there are issues with it because, they are created for different reasons.
Perfect.
So,
and it's not perfect.
Yeah.
Exactly, but when I see tax maps, and I've seen towns that put their stuff online, Town of Warren has a nice little setup where you click on their polygon, and they give some basic square footage of the building and basic name and address stuff. It's very useful, very useful. And I tell people all the time, I'll have people contact me and say, I need to put in 4 different 911 addresses on this parcel. Just like Michelle, if she has 2 buildings on her contiguous parcels, each building should have its own 911 address.
Right.
And people will look at me and say, the program needs to allow you to add as many 911 addresses as you need. And I have to tell them, well, you have to remember,
That's not
the
what this
main
is for.
focus for the grand list is to get tax dollars.
Right.
That's what it's there for, to get an inventory of the town. It's not a 911 street database. If you're going to go down that path, then there has to be a series of other changes. So I tell people, you know, you have to pick a field, one of the extra fields, and track 911 addresses in there if you'd like. But that's not what it's designed to be. You know, just like what you're looking at with the contiguous properties. You know, is the grand list going to reflect all the individual parcels that the tax mappers are going to probably uncover? Probably not, depending on how the tax mappers are looking at it.
Right.
But it's going to have a similar land size from one year to the next. And as we move further down the road using this contiguous parcel feature, it's going to get that much stronger.
Yeah.
You know, a town that has 100 acres of, you know, 100 acres of real estate, you better be able to track that 100 acres.
Right.
You know, no matter what, it always has to add up to that 100 acres, and you should be able to track that. It's just picking a point and starting.
Yeah, and we do, just for our own purposes, have a very strong reason this year as well as the mapping to spend some serious education time in going out and really re-educating them on the use of the contiguous and also how to enter subdivisions so that they're using the system and they really see how it benefits them. You know, as these programs were coming on and they were new, not all the practices were adopted. Mostly, I think, it was a lot of information to ingest and a lot of old habits to give up. But as we've also had turnover and have more people who are accepting of the digitized world, we, you know, they're coming in and they're learning these processes, and I think our grand lists are greatly improved over what they were even, you know, 5-10 years ago. So is it perfect? No, but it is probably the only system in the state at this point that has a uniformed identifier. And at least we can give the parameters and we know what's included and what's not. You know, there is a guideline. It's not just as arbitrary.
Yeah, well, that all those things you just said are why this is such a valuable database beyond just the taxation. Yeah, I mean, it's tantalizing to us, especially now that you're including the contiguous parcel stuff in, you know, what they can do in the database. It's like, oh, it's right there. But
anyway.
But we have to deal with the fact that obviously there are some different purposes. So thank you, both of you, very much. Several of the people thanked you on their way out as well, I should mention, as people are signing off.
That was nice.
Yeah, I really appreciate the time, and I hope the grilling didn't feel too much like a grilling. It's mostly just it's just trying to understand. Since we're not inside your world, we have to try to understand it. So I really appreciate it. And thank you for the tour of NEMRC, Chris.
Yeah. Okay, and you have, I sent you the 2 documents. If anyone's interested in them, you're welcome to forward them on just to see what it is that is included. For those that haven't received a CD before, it's always included with the CD information. So, but in case anyone was curious.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right.
We'll be in
you
touch.
guys have a great day.
You too. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.